She was invisible her whole life, until the night a Mafia king looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Lena Hart never asked to be seen by Marco DeLuca, the man everyone feared. But when her stepsister's engagement party became the stage for her darkest nightmare, and Marco offered her a choice between prison and marriage, being invisible was no longer an option. One glance changed everything. One deal sealed her fate. This is the story of a girl who had nothing, and the ruthless man who saw everything she could become. If you're ready for a story about power, survival, and the dangerous line between protection and possession, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lena's story travels. The crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the ballroom like shattered stars, each prism catching the laughter and champagne toast of Manhattan's elite. Lena Hart moved through the crowd like smoke, present but unnoticed, a shadow in a black catering uniform among women draped in silk and diamonds. Her hands balanced a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres, her eyes downcast, her existence a practiced disappearing act she'd perfected over 23 years of being unwanted. The party celebrated her stepsister's engagement, though no one would know Lena and Vivian Hart shared anything beyond a last name. Vivian stood at the center of the room in a dress that cost more than Lena earned in a year, her blonde hair swept into an elegant twist, her laugh bright and performative. She was everything their stepmother, Patricia Hart, had groomed her to be: polished, connected, destined for greatness. Lena was the mistake. The reminder of her father's first marriage, the daughter he'd loved before he died and left her to Patricia's mercy. "More champagne," a woman snapped, thrusting an empty glass toward Lena without looking at her face. Lena took it with a murmured acknowledgement that went unheard. She'd learned long ago that people like these didn't see service staff as human. They saw furniture that occasionally moved. She made her way back toward the service corridor, her shoulders tight with the familiar ache of being both present and erased. The marble floors gleamed beneath her sensible black shoes, shoes she'd bought herself because Patricia certainly wouldn't spend money on the help, even if that help was technically her stepdaughter. The irony wasn't lost on Lena. She lived in the Hart mansion, bore the Hart name, and had nothing. "Did you see the ring?" one of the catering staff whispered as Lena entered the kitchen. "It's got to be 15 carats, maybe more." "I heard he's connected," another replied, voice dropping. "Like, seriously connected. Vivian Hart's marrying into the DeLuca family." The name sent a ripple through the kitchen. Even Lena, who avoided the news and kept her head down, knew that name. The DeLucas weren't just wealthy. They were powerful in ways that made politicians nervous and prosecutors careful. They owned half of Manhattan's real estate, controlled interests in shipping and construction, and everyone knew the legitimate businesses were just the visible surface of something much deeper and darker. Marco DeLuca was supposed to arrive tonight. The groom himself, come to claim his glittering prize. Lena refilled her tray and pushed back through the service door, telling herself it didn't matter. None of this mattered to her. She would work this party, collect her small paycheck from the catering company, and return to her room in the mansion's forgotten wing, where she could breathe without Patricia's disapproval or Vivian's casual cruelty. She'd survived this long by being invisible. She'd survive tonight the same way. The energy in the ballroom shifted before Lena understood why. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they changed, became more performative, more aware. Women adjusted their posture, men straightened their spines. The air itself seemed to tighten with anticipation. He entered like a storm front, dark and inevitable. Marco DeLuca was not what Lena expected. The society pages showed a handsome man in expensive suits, always photographed at charity galas or business events, his smile calculated and cold. In person, he was something else entirely. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of controlled power that came from absolute certainty. His suit was black and perfectly tailored, but it was his presence that commanded the room, a gravity that pulled every eye toward him, whether people wanted to look or not. His face was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, dark hair swept back, jaw tight with what might have been tension or might have been his natural state. But it was his eyes that stopped Lena's breath. Dark, assessing, missing nothing. The eyes of a man who'd learned to read threats and opportunities in a single glance. Vivian swept toward him immediately, her rehearsed delight on full display. "Darling, everyone, my fiancé has arrived." The crowd applauded politely. Marco accepted Vivian's kiss on his cheek with the practiced ease of a man used to performance, but Lena saw the distance in it. He was here, physically present, but some essential part of him remained untouchable, separated by glass walls no one else seemed to notice. Lena turned away, ready to disappear back into the kitchen's safety, when it happened. His gaze found her. For exactly 3 seconds, Marco DeLuca's dark eyes locked onto Lena Hart across a ballroom full of Manhattan's finest, and the world contracted to just that look. She froze, tray balanced in her hands, heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. His expression didn't change. No smile, no recognition, nothing that anyone else would notice. But something in that look pinned her in place like a butterfly to cork. He saw her, actually saw her, in a way no one had in years. Then Vivian touched his arm, reclaiming his attention with a practiced laugh, and the moment shattered. Marco turned toward his fiancée, his expression smoothing into polite interest, and Lena forced her feet to move, carrying her tray and her racing pulse toward the safety of the service corridor. She told herself it meant nothing. Men like Marco DeLuca didn't notice girls like her. It was a fluke, a random sweep of the room that happened to land on her for a heartbeat. By tomorrow, he wouldn't remember her face. But her hands shook as she set down the tray, and she couldn't explain the certainty settling in her chest. Something had just changed, and she didn't understand what. The party continued for hours. Lena worked mechanically, offering champagne and canapés, clearing empty glasses, existing in the margins. Patricia Hart held court near the terrace, her arm linked with Vivian's, both of them glowing in the reflected power of the DeLuca name. No one looked at Lena. No one ever did. Except once more, near midnight, when she emerged from the kitchen and found Marco DeLuca standing alone near the windows, his broad back to the party, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The crowds had thinned slightly, guests clustering in small groups, the energy shifting from performance to genuine conversation lubricated by expensive alcohol. Lena should have walked past, should have kept her eyes down and her presence invisible. But something made her pause. Perhaps the isolation he wore like armor, the way he stood apart even in the center of his own engagement party. He turned before she could retreat, those dark eyes finding her again with unnerving precision. "You work for the catering company," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was deep, controlled, with the kind of quiet authority that made volume unnecessary. "Yes, sir." Lena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Can I get you anything?" "Your name." The request surprised her. "Lena." "Lena," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "You're Patricia Hart's stepdaughter." Ice flooded her veins. How did he know that? She'd never met this man, never been introduced, never been acknowledged as part of the Hart family in any public way. Patricia made sure of that. Yes, she managed. Marco studied her with an intensity that felt physical, like he was cataloging every detail of her face, her posture, the way she held herself ready to disappear. "You don't look like your sister." "Stepsister," Lena corrected automatically, then immediately regretted the impulse to clarify. "We're not related by blood." "No," Marco agreed quietly. "You're nothing alike." Something in his tone made it sound less like an insult to Vivian and more like an observation about Lena herself. Before she could process that, Vivian's laugh rang out across the room, high and performative, and Marco's attention shifted past Lena's shoulder. "Enjoy the party," he said, dismissing her with the same polite distance he'd probably use with any staff member. Lena nodded and walked away, her heart still racing, her mind spinning. He knew who she was. Somehow, Marco DeLuca had known exactly who she was, despite every effort Patricia had made to erase Lena's connection to the Hart name. The question was why he'd bothered to find out. She didn't see him again that night. By 2 a.m, the party had wound down, the elite drifting toward their drivers and their townhouses, leaving behind empty champagne bottles and the detritus of extravagance. Lena helped the catering staff clean, her body exhausted but her mind unable to quiet. When she finally made it back to the mansion an hour later, walking the 15 blocks because the subway was faster than waiting for Patricia to acknowledge she might need transportation, she found the house dark except for a single light burning in Patricia's study. Lena climbed the servant stairs to her room in the mansion's east wing, the part that used to house actual servants back when the Hart fortune was built on shipping and real estate instead of Patricia's strategic social climbing. Her room was small but private, furnished with cast-offs and overlooked in the general maintenance of the house. The radiator clanked, the window leaked cold air, but it was hers. She should have slept. Dawn would come in a few hours, and she had a shift at the bookstore where she worked days, the job that actually paid enough to save a little money each month toward the escape she'd been planning since she turned 18. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept seeing those dark eyes across the ballroom, kept hearing the certainty in his voice. When he'd said her name, Marco DeLuca knew who she was. And Lena had no idea what that meant, or why it terrified her almost as much as it intrigued her. The answer came 3 days later, delivered not by Patricia's usual cutting remarks or Vivian's casual cruelty, but by a man in a dark suit who appeared at the bookstore during Lena's afternoon shift. "Lena Hart?" he asked, his tone professionally neutral. "Yes?" Lena looked up from the stack of books she'd been shelving, instinct already telling her to be wary. "Mr. DeLuca requests a meeting. Tonight, 8 o'clock. He handed her a card with an address in Midtown. "A car will collect you at 7:30 from your residence." Before Lena could respond, before she could ask why or how or explain that she couldn't possibly, the man was gone, disappearing between the stacks like he'd never been there at all. Lena stared at the card, her hands numb. The address was a private club, the kind of place she'd never be allowed to enter on her own. The kind of place where men like Marco DeLuca made decisions that shaped the city. She should refuse, should ignore the summons and pretend it never happened. But the card felt heavy in her hand, and somewhere beneath the fear, curiosity burned. Marco DeLuca wanted to see her specifically, wanted to meet with her away from Vivian and Patricia and the glittering performance of their engagement. Lena tucked the card into her pocket and finished her shift in a daze, her mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. At 7:15 that evening, she stood in her small room, staring at the limited options in her closet. She owned exactly 2 dresses nice enough for anything beyond casual wear, both bought secondhand, both simple and forgettable. She chose the black one. It seemed appropriate for whatever this meeting would bring, and pulled her dark hair into a neat bun. In the mirror, she looked pale and tired, the purple shadows under her eyes testament to 3 nights of minimal sleep. But her hands were steady as she applied minimal makeup, and her expression was calm. She'd spent years learning to hide fear. Tonight was just another performance. The car arrived exactly at 7:30, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver said nothing, just opened the door and waited for Lena to slide into the leather interior. The ride to Midtown took 20 minutes through evening traffic, and Lena spent every second trying to prepare herself for something she couldn't begin to predict. The club occupied the top 3 floors of a building that looked unremarkable from the street, intentionally so, Lena suspected. The driver escorted her through a private entrance, into an elevator that required a key card, up to a floor where the doors opened onto understated luxury. Dark wood panels, soft lighting, the quiet murmur of wealth and power conducting business away from public eyes. A hostess who looked like she'd stepped from a fashion magazine guided Lena through the main room toward a private dining area in the back. Marco DeLuca sat alone at a table set for 2, his attention on a tablet until Lena entered. Then those dark eyes lifted, and once again she felt the weight of being truly seen. "Lena," he said, standing with fluid grace. "Thank you for coming." As if she'd had a choice. As if women like her said no to men like him. "Mr. DeLuca," Lena replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Marco," he corrected. "Please, sit." She did, perching on the edge of the leather chair, her back straight, every instinct screaming at her to be ready to run, even though she knew she couldn't. The dining room was private, the door closed, and she was entirely at his mercy whether she ran or not. Marco studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully without interrupting. When I'm finished, you can ask questions. Agreed?" Lena nodded, her throat tight. 3 months ago, Marco began, his voice even and factual. Someone began embezzling funds from a charitable foundation your family controls, the Hart Foundation for Youth Services. The thefts were sophisticated, routed through shell companies and offshore accounts designed to look like legitimate operating expenses. The total stolen is approximately $3 million. Lena's breath caught. She knew the foundation. Her father had established it before he died, funding after-school programs and scholarships. Patricia had taken control of it after his death, but Lena had never been involved in its operations. The embezzlement was discovered 2 weeks ago during a routine audit, Marco continued. The evidence trail leads directly to you. What? The word burst from Lena before she could stop herself. That's impossible. I don't have access to the foundation's accounts. I don't have access to anything. Marco held up a hand, stopping her. I know. The evidence is fabricated. Your stepsister, with your stepmother's knowledge and assistance, has been stealing from the foundation for months and building a false trail that points to you. Bank accounts opened in your name with forged signatures. Email correspondence created using credentials they obtained from your personal computer. Digital fingerprints placing you at the center of the conspiracy. The room spun. Lena gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Why would they? Because Patricia Hart wants you gone, Marco said bluntly. She's wanted you gone since your father died, but she couldn't act directly without raising questions. This way, you'll be arrested, prosecuted, and sent to prison. The Hart name might suffer briefly, but Patricia will position herself and Vivian as the innocent victims of your betrayal. The foundation will likely be dissolved, the remaining assets absorbed into Patricia's personal accounts, and you'll be safely removed from her life. Lena couldn't breathe. The casual cruelty of it, the calculation, the months of planning required to build such an elaborate frame. It was worse than anything Patricia had ever done, and Patricia had done plenty. How do you know this? Lena managed. Because I make it my business to know everything about the people my family becomes involved with, Marco replied. When Vivian and I began discussing marriage, I had her background investigated, thoroughly. The foundation discrepancies appeared in that investigation. When I looked closer, the frame became obvious, at least to someone who knows what to look for. Have you told Vivian? Patricia? Lena asked, though she already knew the answer. No. Marco leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes never leaving her face. And I won't. Horror joined the fear churning in Lena's stomach. So you're just going to let them— I'm going to offer you an alternative, Marco interrupted. The authorities will move on this within the week. Patricia has already laid the groundwork with her attorneys, painting herself as the concerned stepmother who discovered the theft and reported it. You have no resources to fight her, no credibility against her social standing, and the evidence against you is substantial enough that even a public defender would advise you to take a plea deal. Then what alternative could you possibly— Marriage, Marco said simply. The word hung in the air between them like a blade. Lena stared at him, certain she'd misheard, but his expression remained serious, waiting. I don't understand, she whispered. Marco's jaw tightened, the first crack in his controlled demeanor. My family has certain expectations. Alliances are built through marriage, partnerships cemented through carefully chosen unions. Vivian Hart is beautiful, connected, and utterly unsuitable for the kind of wife I actually need. She's your fiancée, Lena said numbly. She's a woman my family approved based on surface credentials, her stepmother's social connections, her appearance, her ability to play the role in public. Marco's voice held an edge now, something sharp beneath the control. What my family doesn't understand is that I need someone intelligent, someone capable of discretion, someone who can navigate complex situations without drawing attention. Vivian is none of those things. She's a trophy, and I don't need a trophy. I need a partner. And you think I'm— Lena couldn't even finish the sentence. It was absurd. She was nobody, nothing, invisible. You've survived years in Patricia Hart's house with your dignity intact, Marco said quietly. You've endured cruelty and erasure, and you haven't broken. You work 2 jobs, save your money, and plan an escape you think no one notices. You're intelligent, observant, and you've learned to be invisible when necessary, which is exactly the skill set I need. You investigated me, Lena realized, the violation of it settling over her shoulders like ice water. Yes, Marco didn't apologize. I investigate everyone. It's how I stay alive. The casual acknowledgement of danger, of a life where survival required constant vigilance, should have terrified her. Instead, Lena found herself cataloging facts with the same numb clarity that had gotten her through every crisis Patricia had engineered. Marco DeLuca wasn't just wealthy, he was dangerous. His family's power came from places polite society didn't acknowledge, and marrying him meant entering a world where the rules were different, where safety was never guaranteed. But prison meant rape, violence, and years of her life stolen for crimes she didn't commit. It meant giving Patricia exactly what she wanted, Lena's complete destruction. What exactly are you proposing? Lena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. A marriage contract, Marco replied, pulling a folder from beneath the table. Legal, binding, and entirely practical. You marry me within the week, before the authorities move on the foundation fraud. As my wife, you'll be protected from prosecution. Patricia can't touch you without going through me, and she's not that stupid. The evidence against you becomes irrelevant because my attorneys will bury it, and Patricia knows better than to fight me publicly. And in exchange? Lena opened the folder, scanning the dense legal language. You fulfill the role of my wife. Public appearances when necessary, discretion about my business affairs, and an understanding that this is a strategic arrangement, not a love match. Marco's tone remained businesslike, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or assessment. You'll live in my home, have access to resources including education if you want it, and be compensated for your role. The contract specifies terms, including provisions for dissolution should either party choose to end the arrangement after an agreed period. Lena read quickly, her hands shaking slightly. The contract was shockingly fair. She'd retain certain personal freedoms, have her own accounts, even a clause that protected her right to pursue her own interests within the bounds of discretion. It was more than she'd ever had under Patricia's roof. How long? She asked. Minimum 3 years, Marco said. Enough time to satisfy my family's expectations and establish the marriage as legitimate. After that, we can renegotiate or part ways cleanly. 3 years. 3 years as the wife of a man she didn't know, in a world she didn't understand, playing a role she'd never imagined, or however many years a prison sentence for embezzlement would bring. I need time to think, Lena said, though they both knew she had no time at all. You have until tomorrow night, Marco replied. After that, the window closes. Patricia moves forward, and you'll be arrested by the end of the week. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. A car will be outside your residence tomorrow at 8. If you get in, we proceed. If you don't, I'll know you've made your choice, and I won't interfere further. Why? The question burst from Lena before she could stop it. Why offer me this at all? You could marry anyone. Why help me? Marco looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Because I don't like being sold a lie, he said finally. Vivian and Patricia presented themselves as a certain kind of alliance, and the reality doesn't match. I'm a businessman, Lena. When a deal doesn't meet specifications, I find a better option. And I'm the better option, Lena said flatly, still not quite believing it. You're the honest option, Marco corrected. You don't pretend to be something you're not. You don't lie about your circumstances or your capabilities. In my world, that's rarer than you'd think, and exponentially more valuable. He moved toward the door, then paused. The car tomorrow. 8 o'clock. The choice is yours. Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone in the private dining room with a contract that offered salvation or damnation and exactly 24 hours to decide which. She sat there for a long time, the silence pressing against her ears, her mind spinning through impossible calculations. Every option was terrible. Every choice led somewhere dangerous. But only one option let her keep fighting. Only one option gave her a chance. Lena took the contract and walked out of the club into the Manhattan night, the winter air sharp against her face, the city lights blurring through tears she refused to let fall. Tomorrow at 8, a car would arrive. And Lena Hart, the invisible girl who'd spent her whole life disappearing, would have to decide whether to step into the light, and into a marriage with a man who saw her as a transaction, a solution to a problem, a better option than the lie he'd almost bought. The walk back to the Hart mansion took 40 minutes, but Lena barely felt the cold. Her mind was chaos and calculation, fear and stubborn refusal to let Patricia win. By the time she climbed the servant's stairs to her room, she'd made her decision. She spent the night packing her few possessions into 2 bags, everything she owned, everything that mattered, fitting neatly into a space small enough to carry. When dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lena sat by her window and watched the city wake up. Somewhere out there, Marco DeLuca was preparing for her answer. Somewhere in this mansion, Patricia was sleeping peacefully, confident in her victory, certain that Lena's destruction was inevitable. And somewhere inside herself, Lena found the rage she'd been suppressing for years, the anger at being erased, dismissed, treated like something disposable. Patricia wanted her gone, wanted her destroyed, eliminated, removed from the Hart legacy like she'd never existed. But Lena Hart was done disappearing. At 7:30 that evening, she carried her bags downstairs. Patricia was in the drawing room with Vivian, both of them dressed for some social engagement, neither acknowledging Lena's presence as she passed. Lena stepped outside into the December cold at exactly 7:55. The street was quiet, lined with brownstones and bare trees, the kind of neighborhood where old money lived quietly and people minded their own business. At exactly 8 o'clock, the black sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and waited. Lena looked back at the Hart mansion one final time, at the home that had never been home, at the family that had never been family, at the life she was about to leave behind forever. Then she picked up her bags, walked to the car, and got in. The door closed with a solid click. The driver returned to his seat, pulled smoothly into traffic, and drove her toward whatever came next. Lena didn't look back again. The sedan moved through Manhattan with smooth precision, carrying Lena away from everything she'd known toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. The driver maintained professional silence, and Lena was grateful for it. Her mind needed the quiet to process what she'd just done, the irrevocable choice she'd made the moment she stepped into this car. The city blurred past the tinted windows, familiar streets transformed by the knowledge that she was seeing them differently now, as someone else. Not Patricia Hart's unwanted stepdaughter anymore. Not the invisible girl serving champagne at parties where no one knew her name. In less than a week, she would be Marco DeLuca's wife. The thought sent ice and fire through her veins in equal measure. The car pulled up to a building in Tribeca, all glass and steel and understated wealth. The kind of place where security was invisible but absolute, where privacy cost more than most people earned in a year. The driver opened her door, retrieved her bags from the trunk, and gestured toward the entrance where a doorman already stood waiting. "Miss Hart," the doorman said with polite deference that felt surreal. "Mr. DeLuca is expecting you, penthouse level." The elevator required a key card the doorman provided, and Lena rode up 47 floors in silence, watching the city drop away beneath her through the glass walls. At the top, the doors opened directly into an apartment that stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan in 3 directions, the skyline glittering like scattered diamonds against the darkness. The space was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and expensive simplicity. Dark hardwood floors, furniture that looked designed rather than bought, art on the walls that Lena suspected was original and probably worth more than the Hart mansion. Marco stood near the windows, still dressed in the dark suit he'd worn earlier, a glass of something amber in his hand. He turned when the elevator chimed, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said simply. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Lena stepped into the apartment, her bags suddenly feeling shabby and small in this space. "I thought you might choose prison over me," Marco replied, something that might have been humor flickering in his dark eyes. "Some people prefer certain danger to unknown risk." "I've lived with certain danger my whole life," Lena said quietly. "At least this risk comes with better terms." Marco's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Practical. Good." He set down his glass and crossed to where she stood. "Let me show you your room." Your room, not our room. Lena felt something unknot in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. He led her down a hallway lined with more art, past what looked like a home office and a library, to a bedroom that was larger than her entire space at the Hart mansion. The furniture was elegant and clearly expensive, the bed enormous, the attached bathroom visible through an open door that revealed marble and chrome. "This is yours," Marco said, setting her bags inside. "Private bathroom, closet, through there. You'll need appropriate clothing for public appearances. I'll have my assistant arrange for a stylist tomorrow." Lena turned to face him, sudden exhaustion washing over her now that the adrenaline was fading. "When's the wedding?" "Friday," Marco replied. 3 days. It will be private, just immediate family and witnesses. My attorneys have already filed the necessary paperwork." 3 days. Lena had imagined weddings once when she was younger and still believed in fairy tales. White dresses and flowers and love shining in someone's eyes. This would be nothing like that. A legal transaction, witnessed and binding, as romantic as a business merger, which was exactly what it was. "Your family," Lena said slowly. "What did you tell them about Vivian?" "That the engagement was a mistake and I'd found someone more suitable." Marco's tone remained neutral, but something hard glinted in his eyes. "My father was displeased. My mother less so. Vivian's connections were valuable, but not irreplaceable." "And Patricia?" "I had my attorney contact her this afternoon," Marco said. "Informed her that you're under my protection now, and any attempt to proceed with false charges against you will be met with legal action that will destroy what's left of the Hart reputation. I also made it clear that the Foundation investigation will continue, and if evidence of actual embezzlement surfaces, I won't hesitate to ensure appropriate consequences." Which meant Patricia and Vivian would be looking over their shoulders, wondering if Marco's people would find proof of their crimes. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was more than Lena had dared hope for. "She'll hate me for this," Lena said, though she felt oddly detached from the idea. Patricia's hatred was nothing new. "She already hated you," Marco replied bluntly. "Now she'll also fear you. That's an improvement." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll go over expectations and you'll meet with the stylist. Friday we marry, and Saturday there's a family dinner where you'll be introduced as my wife. Questions can wait until tomorrow." "Just one," Lena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Why didn't you just expose Vivian and Patricia? You have the evidence. You could have destroyed them." Marco looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes assessing. "Because that would have been about them," he said finally. "This is about you. You needed a way out, and I needed an honest partner. Everything else is secondary." He left before Lena could respond, the door closing quietly behind him, leaving her alone in a bedroom that cost more than she'd earned in her entire life, in an apartment owned by a man she barely knew, preparing to marry someone who saw her as a solution to a problem. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking now that she was finally alone. The exhaustion crashed over her in waves, but beneath it ran a current of something else, something fierce and defiant that refused to let her collapse. She'd survived Patricia's cruelty. She'd survived years of being erased and dismissed and treated like nothing. She could survive this too. And maybe, just maybe, she could do more than survive. Maybe she could actually build something from the ashes of the life she'd left behind. Lena unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her few pieces of clothing in a closet designed for a wardrobe 50 times larger. She showered in the marble bathroom, the water pressure better than anything she'd experienced, and when she finally crawled into bed, the sheets were softer than clouds. She should have felt like an imposter, should have felt terrified, overwhelmed, completely out of her depth. Instead, as she drifted towards sleep, Lena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: possibility. Morning arrived with winter sunlight streaming through windows Lena had forgotten to cover. She woke disoriented, the unfamiliar room taking several seconds to resolve into memory and reality. Marco's apartment, her new life. 3 days until a wedding that would change everything. She found Marco in the kitchen, dressed more casually than she'd yet seen him, dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. He was reading something on a tablet while coffee brewed, the domestic normalcy of it jarring against everything else about him. "Coffee?" he offered, looking up as she entered. "Please," Lena said, suddenly aware she was wearing the same worn sleep shirt she'd owned for 5 years, her hair unbrushed, her face clean of makeup. She probably looked exactly like what she was, a girl way out of her depth. But Marco's expression didn't change as he poured coffee into an expensive-looking mug and handed it to her. "Stylist will be here at 10. My assistant Elena will coordinate everything you need for the next few days. She's discreet and efficient. Trust her." "Okay," Lena said, cradling the mug like a lifeline. The coffee was perfect, rich and strong, exactly what she needed. Marco leaned against the counter, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "We should establish some ground rules before Friday." Lena's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "I'm listening." "First, honesty. I need to know I can trust what you tell me, even if it's difficult. If you're uncomfortable with something, say so. If you need something, ask. I can't work with someone who hides problems until they explode." "I can do that," Lena said, though years of surviving Patricia had taught her to hide everything. This would require unlearning instincts. Second, discretion. My business involves situations that can't be discussed outside certain contexts. You'll hear things, see things, meet people whose activities aren't always legal in the traditional sense. I need your silence about those matters. Ice water down her spine. Here was the acknowledgement of what she'd already known. Marco DeLuca's power came from places polite society pretended didn't exist. Organized crime, though he'd never used that phrase. The kind of business that made politicians nervous and prosecutors careful. "Will I be in danger?" Lena asked bluntly. "Potentially," Marco said, and she appreciated that he didn't lie. "Less danger than you'd face in prison, and I'll ensure you have protection. But yes, being my wife carries certain risks." "What kind of protection?" "Security. Bodyguards when you're out alone, though they'll be discreet. This building has excellent security already. You'll also learn basic self-defense. I'll arrange training." The matter-of-fact way he discussed bodyguards and self-defense should have terrified her. Instead, Lena found herself calculating. Risk versus reward. Danger versus the alternative. She'd already made her choice when she got in the car last night. "Third rule?" she prompted. "Public unity," Marco said. "We can disagree in private, but in public we present a united front. My enemies will look for weaknesses, divisions they can exploit. We can't give them that opening." "You have enemies," Lena said. Not a question. "Many," Marco confirmed without hesitation. "Comes with the territory. Most will leave you alone out of respect for me, but some will test boundaries. That's why the protection matters." Lena sipped her coffee, processing. "What do you expect from me?" "In this marriage, I mean, beyond public appearances." Marco's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval. "Smart question. I expect you to be present at family functions and certain business dinners, to handle social obligations with grace, to manage the household staff. I have people, but they need direction. Beyond that, your time is your own. If you want to continue your education, pursue interests, work in some capacity, that's acceptable as long as it doesn't conflict with discretion requirements." "And you?" Lena asked, emboldened by his directness. "What should I expect from you?" "Honesty when possible, though sometimes I won't be able to tell you everything immediately. Protection absolutely. Resources as needed. Respect for the boundaries we establish." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. "I won't pretend this is a love match, Lena. I won't lie to you about affection I don't feel. But I will treat you fairly, and I'll keep my word about the contract terms." It was perhaps the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. No false promises, no manipulative reassurances, just clear expectations and mutual benefit. "One more question," Lena said quietly. "What about other women?" Marco's jaw tightened slightly. "The contract specifies discretion on both sides. I won't humiliate you publicly with affairs, and I expect the same courtesy. What happens privately between consenting adults is separate, but it stays private." So he might take lovers, as long as he was discreet. The knowledge settled in Lena's chest with surprising indifference. She'd expected this to be a business arrangement, and Marco was simply confirming what the contract had already stated. At least he was being honest about it. "Understood," she said. The doorbell chimed, an elegant sound, nothing like a normal doorbell. Marco straightened. "That will be Elena and the stylist. I have meetings most of the day, but I'll be back this evening. Elena knows how to reach me if you need anything. He paused on his way out of the kitchen, turning back. You're handling this better than I expected. I've had practice surviving impossible situations, Lena replied. Something flickered in Marco's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. Good. You'll need that skill here too. Then he was gone, and Lena was left alone with her coffee and the understanding that she'd just agreed to marry a man who'd laid out their relationship with the emotional warmth of a corporate merger. But at least he'd been honest. In Lena's experience, honesty was rarer and more valuable than affection. Elena turned out to be a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, elegant style, and the kind of efficient competence that suggested she could run a small country if necessary. The stylist, a man named Andre, had an artistic temperament and an eye for detail that bordered on obsessive. They transformed Lena's room into a temporary fashion studio, bringing racks of clothing, shoes, accessories, and makeup that made her head spin. Andre assessed her with the intensity of a sculptor examining marble, walking circles around her while making notes on a tablet. Good bone structure, he murmured. Excellent posture. You carry yourself well despite the terrible clothes. Coloring is lovely, very Snow White. We'll emphasize that. Play to your strengths. For the next 4 hours, Lena was measured, photographed, dressed, and redressed in outfits that cost more than she used to make in 6 months. Andre had opinions about everything: colors, cuts, fabrics, the way certain styles complemented or clashed with her frame. Elena took notes, coordinated deliveries, and managed the chaos with unflappable calm. For the wedding, Andre said, pulling out a dress bag with reverence. Marco specified you'd need something appropriate for a private ceremony. I took the liberty of selecting options. The dresses were beautiful, elegant, sophisticated, nothing like the princess confections Lena had imagined as a girl. She tried them on one by one, while Andre and Elena discussed pros and cons with the seriousness of military strategists. They settled on a dress in champagne silk, simple and stunning, with clean lines that skimmed her figure without clinging. When Lena looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The girl staring back looked confident, elegant, like someone who belonged in Marco DeLuca's world. Perfect, Andre declared. You'll be the most beautiful bride in Manhattan on Friday. It's just a small ceremony, Lena protested. All the more reason to be stunning, Elena said with a slight smile. First impressions matter, especially with Marco's family. They'll be watching you, judging whether you're suitable. This dress tells them you are. After Andre left with promises to have the rest of the wardrobe delivered within 24 hours, Elena sat down with Lena in the living room, her expression becoming more serious. I've worked for Marco for 8 years, Elena said. I want you to understand something important. He's not an easy man. He's complicated, dangerous in ways that matter, and he doesn't let people close easily. But he's also fair, protective of what's his, and he keeps his word absolutely. You're warning me, Lena said quietly. I'm telling you what to expect, Elena corrected. Marco chose you for specific reasons, and those reasons are good ones. But this world, his world, is different from anything you've known. There will be people who test you, situations that feel impossible, moments when you'll question this choice. I'm already questioning it, Lena admitted. Elena's expression softened slightly. That's honest. Good. Marco values honesty above almost everything else. My advice? Be exactly who you are. Don't try to become someone you think he wants. He chose you because you're not like the women in his usual circles. Don't lose that in trying to fit in. What if I can't handle it? Lena asked, voicing the fear that had been building since last night. What if I'm not strong enough for this? You survived Patricia Hart's house for years, Elena said bluntly. You worked 2 jobs, saved money, planned an escape, and kept your dignity intact through systematic cruelty. That takes more strength than most of Marco's family has ever needed. You'll be fine. The vote of confidence from this competent, sharp-eyed woman settled something in Lena's chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Elena said with dry humor. Wait until after the family dinner on Saturday. That's when the real test begins. She left Lena with a schedule for the next few days, her personal phone number, and instructions to call if anything felt wrong or unsafe. When the door closed behind her, Lena was alone again in the stunning apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life that still didn't feel real. She spent the afternoon exploring the space more thoroughly, discovering a library full of books that suggested Marco's interests ranged from classical literature to military history to philosophy. His home office was locked, which didn't surprise her. The kitchen was professional grade despite the sense that Marco didn't cook often. Everything was clean, organized, expensive, and somehow impersonal, like a very high-end hotel rather than a home. Marco returned around 7, looking tired in a way that made him seem more human. He loosened his tie as he entered, his dark eyes finding Lena where she sat, curled up in a chair by the windows with a book from his library. "How did it go with Andre?" he asked. "Overwhelming," Lena admitted, "but Elena was helpful." "She usually is." Marco poured himself a drink from the bar cart near the windows. "Hungry? We could order something." The domestic normalcy of the question, could they order dinner, like any couple might, felt surreal. But Lena nodded and they ended up eating Thai food at the dining table while Marco asked surprisingly ordinary questions about her day, and she found herself answering with more ease than expected. "Elena said Saturday's family dinner is important," Lena ventured between bites of pad thai. "It is," Marco confirmed. "My parents will be evaluating whether you're suitable. My sister will be curious but probably friendly. Various cousins and uncles will attend, each with their own agenda and opinions. And if they decide I'm not suitable?" "Too late," Marco said bluntly. "We'll be married by then. They'll adjust or they won't, but the marriage stands either way." "You're not concerned about their approval?" Lena asked, surprised. Marco's expression hardened slightly. "My father spent years grooming me to take over the family business. He thinks that gives him veto power over my choices. It doesn't. I respect his experience, but I make my own decisions." There was history there, layers of family dynamics Lena couldn't begin to understand, but she recognized the tension, the complicated relationship between duty and autonomy. "Tell me about your family," she said impulsively, "so I'm not walking in completely blind." Marco considered her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "My father, Vincent, built our current power base. He's ruthless, strategic, and believes family loyalty is absolute. My mother, Carmela, is more subtle, but no less dangerous. She reads people better than anyone I know." "Your sister?" "Isabella, 2 years younger, married to one of my father's lieutenants. She's smarter than most people realize, which she uses to her advantage." "And they'll all be judging me," Lena said, trying not to let anxiety creep into her voice. "They'll be judging whether you're weak," Marco corrected. "Whether you'll be a liability or an asset. Show them you're neither weak nor stupid, and you'll be fine." "Just like that?" Lena couldn't keep the skepticism from her tone. "Just like that," Marco confirmed. "They respect strength, Lena. Not cruelty or aggression necessarily, but the ability to hold your ground. You've been doing that your whole life. You just didn't realize it was a valuable skill." The conversation drifted to other topics. The wedding ceremony logistics, the legal paperwork his attorneys needed her to sign, practical matters that felt strange to discuss so casually. When they finally said goodnight and retreated to separate bedrooms, Lena felt exhausted but less terrified than she'd expected. Marco DeLuca was dangerous, complicated, and operating in a world she didn't understand. But he was also honest, direct, and surprisingly easy to talk to when the conversation stayed practical. She could work with that. The next 2 days blurred together in a whirlwind of preparation. More meetings with attorneys, signing documents that made the marriage legally binding. A quiet session with Elena reviewing protocols for family interactions. Andre delivered the rest of Lena's new wardrobe, transforming her closet from empty to full of elegant, expensive clothing that fit perfectly, and made her look like someone who belonged in Marco's world. Thursday evening, Marco knocked on her bedroom door, which he'd never done before. Lena opened it to find him holding a small velvet box. "Wedding rings," he said without preamble. "I need to make sure yours fits." He opened the box to reveal 2 platinum bands, simple, elegant, expensive in their understated perfection. Marco took the smaller ring and reached for Lena's left hand, his touch impersonal and efficient as he slid the band onto her finger. It fit perfectly, of course. Marco had probably known her exact size from whatever investigation he'd conducted. "You don't have to wear it constantly," he said, "but you'll need it for family functions and public appearances." Lena looked down at the ring circling her finger, the physical symbol of a marriage that would be legal but not real, binding but not loving. "Do you want me to wear it?" she asked. Marco met her eyes, something unreadable in his dark gaze. "I want you to do whatever feels right to you. This isn't a traditional marriage, Lena. We don't have to pretend otherwise when we're alone." But the ring stayed on her finger that night, and Lena caught herself touching it nervously as she tried to sleep, turning it around and around, feeling the weight of tomorrow settling over her like snow. Friday morning arrived clear and cold, winter sunlight making Manhattan glitter like it was celebrating. Lena woke early, her stomach tight with nerves, and found Marco already awake, dressed in a dark suit that was probably custom-tailored and definitely cost more than a car. "Ready?" he asked when she emerged from her room, wearing the champagne silk dress that made her look like someone else entirely. "No," Lena admitted honestly, "but I'm here anyway." Marco's lips curved in that almost smile she was learning to recognize. "Good answer. The car's waiting." The ceremony took place at City Hall, witnessed by Elena and Marco's attorney, a man named Richard who treated the proceedings with the same efficiency he'd probably use for any legal transaction. The official who married them was pleasant and professional, reading the vows with practiced ease. When it came time for Lena to say, "I do," her voice was steady despite her racing heart. Marco's voice was calm and certain, like he made binding legal commitments every day. Maybe he did. The kiss was brief, perfunctory, their lips barely touching before Marco stepped back with the same control he brought to everything. If the official noticed the lack of warmth, she didn't comment. And just like that, Lena Hart became Lena DeLuca. The walk out of City Hall felt surreal, like she was floating outside her body, watching someone else leave that building as a married woman. The winter air hit her face, sharp and clarifying, grounding her back into reality. "How do you feel?" Marco asked as they settled into the car. "Like I just signed my life away to a stranger," Lena said honestly. "You did," Marco agreed without sympathy, "but you also just guaranteed Patricia Hart can never touch you again." "Fair trade?" Lena looked down at the platinum ring on her finger, now joined by a second band that Marco had slid on during the ceremony. "Ask me again in a year." "Fair enough," Marco said, and they rode back to the apartment in silence, legally bound but emotionally distant, married but not intimate, partners but not lovers. Tomorrow they'd face his family. Tonight, they were just two people who'd made a calculated choice, living with the consequences and hoping they'd calculated correctly. Lena stood at the windows that night, looking out at Manhattan glittering below, her reflection ghosted in the glass, wearing a wedding dress and platinum rings that felt both foreign and permanent. She was Marco DeLuca's wife now, and tomorrow she'd find out what that really meant. Saturday arrived with heavy clouds threatening snow, the kind of weather that made Manhattan feel smaller, more intimate, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Lena stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, studying the woman looking back at her with critical eyes that still struggled to reconcile the reflection with reality. The dress Elena had selected was deep burgundy, elegant without being flashy, the kind of thing that whispered money rather than shouting it. Her dark hair was swept into a smooth chignon, her makeup subtle but polished, and the platinum rings on her left hand caught the light every time she moved. She looked like someone who belonged at a DeLuca family dinner, which was precisely the point. She looked nothing like the invisible girl who'd served champagne just 2 weeks ago. "Almost ready?" Marco's voice came from the doorway, and Lena turned to find him watching her with that assessing gaze she was learning to read. He was looking for weaknesses, cracks in her composure, anything that might signal she wasn't prepared for what was coming. "As ready as I'll ever be," Lena replied, her voice steadier than her pulse. Marco stepped into the room, and she noticed he was carrying a velvet box, similar to the one that had held their wedding rings. "One more thing," he said, opening it to reveal a stunning diamond necklace, the stones arranged in an elegant pattern that probably cost more than most houses. Lena's breath caught. "That's expected," Marco finished. "My mother will notice if my new wife doesn't wear appropriate jewelry to her first family dinner. This was my grandmother's. Wearing it sends a message about your position in the family." He moved behind her, and Lena felt the cool weight of the diamonds settle against her collarbone as Marco fastened the clasp with practiced efficiency. His fingers barely brushed her skin, but she felt the contact like electricity, her body hyper-aware of his proximity. "There," he said, stepping back. "Now you look the part." Lena met his eyes in the mirror. What if looking the part isn't enough? "It won't be," Marco said bluntly. "They'll test you, push to see where you break. My father will try to intimidate you. My mother will probe for weaknesses with questions that sound innocent but aren't. Various relatives will make assumptions about who you are and why I married you." "Reassuring," Lena said dryly, trying to ignore the anxiety tightening her chest. Marco's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "You've survived worse, Lena. Patricia Hart spent years trying to break you, and you're still standing. My family is dangerous in different ways, but you have something now you didn't have before." "What's that?" "Me," Marco said simply. "You're mine now, which means anyone who hurts you answers to me. They know that. It won't stop them from testing boundaries, but it sets limits on how far they'll push." The possessive certainty in his voice should have bothered her, but instead Lena felt something loosen in her chest. Marco DeLuca might be using her for his own purposes, but he was also genuinely protective of what he considered his, and for better or worse, she was his now. "Let's go," Marco said, offering his arm with old-fashioned formality. "Time to introduce Mrs. DeLuca to the family." The DeLuca family estate was in Westchester, a sprawling property that made the Hart mansion look modest by comparison. The house itself was stone and elegant, surrounded by manicured grounds that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. Security was visible but discreet, men in dark suits positioned at strategic points, cameras hidden in the landscaping, the sense that nothing happened on this property without someone knowing about it. The car pulled up to the front entrance and Marco helped Lena out with the kind of attentiveness that looked natural but felt rehearsed. They were performing now, she realized. From this moment until they left, every gesture, every word would be calculated and observed. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her late 50s with dark hair streaked with silver, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of timeless elegance that came from generations of wealth and power. She wore a navy dress with pearl earrings, her posture perfect, her expression politely neutral as she studied Lena with the intensity of a scientist examining a new specimen. "Madre," Marco said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "This is Lena. Lena, my mother, Carmela DeLuca." "Mrs. DeLuca," Lena said, offering her hand with what she hoped was appropriate confidence. Carmela's handshake was firm, her skin cool and dry. "Lena, what an unexpected pleasure." Her voice held the faintest hint of an accent, something old-world and refined. Marco mentioned he'd made a sudden change in plans, but he was quite economical with details. "I apologize for the short notice," Lena said, holding the older woman's gaze despite wanting to look away. "The timing was complicated." "I'm sure it was," Carmela said with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Come inside, the family is eager to meet you." The house was as impressive inside as out. Marble floors, original art on the walls, the kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Carmela led them through a formal living room where several people had already gathered, conversation stopping as Marco and Lena entered. "Everyone," Carmela said, her voice carrying effortless authority, "this is Lena, Marco's wife. Lena, this is the family." The next 20 minutes were a blur of introductions. Marco's father, Vincent, was exactly what Lena expected. Tall, imposing, with Marco's dark eyes and an expression that suggested he was perpetually calculating angles and advantages. His handshake was a test of grip strength, his gaze dismissive in a way that made Lena's spine stiffen with instinctive defiance. "So you're the one who replaced the Hart girl," Vincent said, his tone suggesting he found the substitution questionable. "Marco said you were more suitable. We'll see." "I look forward to proving it," Lena replied evenly, refusing to let his obvious disapproval rattle her. Marco's sister, Isabella, was warmer, or at least better at pretending to be. She was beautiful in a way that was clearly strategic, her smile practiced but not entirely false, her assessment of Lena quick and thorough. "Welcome to the family," Isabella said, her embrace brief but seemingly genuine. "Marco's been quite secretive about you. I had to hear about the marriage from Mother, can you imagine? It was a quick decision, Lena said carefully. Apparently, Isabella replied with a knowing look that suggested she understood more than she was saying. We should have lunch sometime, just us. I can help you navigate the family politics. They can be complicated. The offer felt genuine, but Lena had learned not to trust surface warmth. Still, she nodded and smiled, playing the part of the grateful newcomer. The rest of the family was a collection of uncles, cousins, and various relatives whose exact relationships Lena lost track of quickly. They all studied her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism, clearly wondering who this unknown woman was and why Marco had married her so suddenly. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that could have seated 20 but held 12 tonight. Lena found herself seated between Marco and Isabella, directly across from Carmela, who watched her with the focused attention of a hawk tracking prey. The first course arrived, and conversation flowed around topics that felt deliberately designed to test Lena's knowledge and composure. Business matters discussed in vague terms that everyone except her seemed to understand. References to people and events she had no context for. Questions about her background that probed for weaknesses. So, Lena, Vincent said from the head of the table, his voice cutting through other conversations, Marco mentioned you worked for a catering company. Interesting background for a DeLuca wife. The table went quiet, everyone watching to see how she'd handle the obvious condescension. I worked several jobs, Lena said calmly, meeting Vincent's gaze directly. Catering helped pay for night classes. I find working for a living builds character, though I understand that's not a universal perspective. Several people around the table shifted, and Lena caught the faintest hint of amusement in Carmela's eyes. Vincent's expression hardened, but before he could respond, Marco spoke. Lena put herself through college while living in a hostile environment, Marco said, his tone casual, but with an edge that suggested disagreement wouldn't be tolerated. She has more practical experience with survival than most people at this table. I consider that an asset. Survival, Vincent repeated, the word heavy with skepticism. This family requires more than survival instincts, Marco. It requires understanding of our business, our values, our way of doing things. Which Lena will learn, Marco replied smoothly. Just as you learned when you married into the family, father. Or have you forgotten you weren't born a DeLuca either? The tension at the table ratcheted up several degrees. Lena kept her expression neutral, but internally she was recalibrating her understanding of Marco's relationship with his father. This wasn't just typical family friction. There was genuine conflict here, power struggles playing out over wine and pasta. Carmela intervened with the practiced ease of someone who'd mediated these battles for decades. Tell me, Lena, what did you study in college? Literature and business, Lena replied, grateful for the shift to safer ground. I never finished my degree, but I plan to complete it when circumstances allow. Literature, Carmela repeated thoughtfully. Do you have favorite authors? The question felt like another test, but Lena answered honestly. I've always loved the Brontes, Jane Eyre particularly. I appreciate stories about women who refuse to accept the limitations others place on them. Something flickered in Carmela's expression, recognition, perhaps, or approval. An appropriate choice for someone in your position. The conversation moved on, but Lena felt she'd passed some invisible threshold. Carmela's questions became less probing, more genuinely curious. Isabella engaged her in discussion about books and Manhattan cultural events, clearly trying to be welcoming. Even some of the uncles and cousins seemed to relax slightly, their assessment shifting from openly skeptical to cautiously accepting. Only Vincent remained cold, his disapproval a constant presence at the head of the table. After dinner, the family moved to the library for coffee and continued conversation. Marco was pulled aside by his father and several uncles for what was clearly a business discussion, leaving Lena with the women of the family. Carmela settled into a chair near the fireplace, gesturing for Lena to sit beside her while Isabella and the other women clustered in small groups around the room. You handled Vincent well, Carmela said quietly, her voice pitched for Lena's ears only. Most people either try to please him or challenge him directly. You did neither. You simply held your ground. That's wise. I had good practice, Lena replied, thinking of Patricia's years of criticism and dismissal. Yes, Marco mentioned your stepmother, Carmela said, her sharp eyes studying Lena's face. Patricia Hart. I've met her at various charity functions. A woman who values appearance over substance, I think. That's accurate, Lena said carefully. And she tried to destroy you, Carmela continued, the statement not quite a question. Framed you for embezzlement, I understand. Quite vicious, even by the standards I'm accustomed to. Lena's breath caught. How much did Carmela know? Had Marco told his mother everything, or had she conducted her own investigation? Marco told you, Lena said, deciding honesty was the safest path. Marco told me you were intelligent, resilient, and honest, Carmela corrected. I found out the rest myself. I make it my business to know who enters this family, Lena. Your stepmother is a petty woman who saw you as a threat to her daughter's inheritance. The embezzlement frame was sloppy work, honestly. If I'd wanted to destroy someone, I'd have been far more thorough. The casual way Carmela discussed destruction sent ice through Lena's veins, but she kept her expression steady. I'm grateful Marco intervened when he did. Are you? Carmela asked, tilting her head slightly. Or are you simply choosing the lesser of two evils, my son over prison? The directness of the question was startling, but Lena found herself appreciating it. Carmela wasn't playing games or dancing around implications. She wanted the truth. Both, Lena admitted. Marco offered me a way out of an impossible situation, and I took it. But I also think this arrangement benefits us both. He gets a wife who understands discretion and won't cause drama, and I get protection and resources I've never had access to. Carmela studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Honest. Good. This family has enough liars and schemers already. We don't need another one. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting to where Marco stood across the room in intense conversation with his father. My son is complicated, Lena. He's brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and he carries the weight of expectations that would crush most men. He's also been alone for a long time, by choice and circumstance. He's told me this isn't a love match, Lena said quietly, that it's a strategic arrangement. Marco tells himself many things, Carmela replied with a slight smile. What he believes and what might become true are sometimes different, but that's for you both to discover, not for me to predict. Before Lena could respond, Isabella appeared beside them with fresh coffee. Mother, stop interrogating the poor girl. She's been here less than 3 hours. Give her time to breathe before you extract her complete life story. I'm simply getting to know my new daughter-in-law, Carmela said mildly. Surely that's appropriate. Of course it is, Isabella replied, settling into a nearby chair. As long as you remember she's family now, not a suspect. Family can be both, Carmela pointed out, but her tone held a trace of humor. The women talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from books to Manhattan Society to the various charitable foundations the family supported. Lena contributed when appropriate, listened carefully when she didn't know enough to speak, and slowly began to understand the complex dynamics of the DeLuca women. Carmela was the matriarch, her power quiet but absolute. Isabella was the bridge between generations, modern enough to relate to Lena but traditional enough to respect the family structure. The various cousins and aunts occupied different niches, each with their own particular role and influence. It was a delicate ecosystem, and Lena was the disruptive new element they were all trying to categorize and manage. Across the room, the men's discussion had grown heated. Lena couldn't hear the specific words, but she could read Marco's body language, the tension in his shoulders, the controlled anger in his gestures, the way he held his ground against his father's obvious disapproval. They're arguing about you, Isabella said quietly, following Lena's gaze. Father thinks Marco made a mistake marrying someone without family connections or useful alliances. Marco is reminding Father that he makes his own decisions and doesn't require approval. Should I be worried? Lena asked. No, Carmela answered before Isabella could. Vincent will bluster and complain, but ultimately he'll accept Marco's choice because he has no alternative. Marco controls too much of the business now for Vincent to truly oppose him. This is posturing, not genuine threat. Though it might get uncomfortable for a while, Isabella added. Father doesn't like being overruled, especially not in front of the family. As if summoned by their discussion, Marco broke away from the group of men and crossed the room to where Lena sat. His expression was controlled, but she could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. We're leaving, he said, his tone brooking no argument. Lena's had enough family time for one evening. So soon? Carmela asked, though her tone suggested she understood exactly why Marco was cutting the visit short. We have early plans tomorrow, Marco replied smoothly, offering his hand to help Lena stand. Thank you for dinner, Madre. It was lovely, as always. The goodbye process took another 15 minutes. More polite exchanges, promises to visit again soon, Isabella extracting a commitment from Lena to have lunch the following week. Vincent remained noticeably absent from the farewells, which seemed to suit Marco fine. Finally, they were back in the car, pulling away from the estate, the tension draining from Marco's shoulders as Manhattan's lights grew closer. I'm sorry, he said after several minutes of silence. My father was out of line tonight. He doesn't approve of me, Lena replied, stating the obvious. He doesn't approve of anyone I choose without his input, Marco corrected. This isn't personal to you. It's about control. He's been trying to manage my life since I was old enough to understand the family business, and he resents that I've moved beyond his influence. Lena processed this, understanding clicking into place. That's why you married me so quickly, not just because I needed protection, but because it was a choice he couldn't veto. Marco's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Partially, yes, though everything I told you about needing an honest partner was also true. With you, I get both autonomy and practical benefit. With Vivian, I'd have gotten a wife my father approved of, and nothing else of value. They rode in silence for a while, the city lights streaming past the windows. Lena turned the platinum rings on her finger, thinking about the evening, the families she'd just been introduced to, the complex web of power and obligation she was now part of. Your mother is formidable, she said finally. She is, Marco agreed. What did you think of her? I think she's dangerous in ways your father isn't, Lena replied honestly. He's obvious about his disapproval, but she's subtle. She knows things she shouldn't, sees connections other people miss, and her power comes from understanding people better than they understand themselves. Marco's expression shifted to something that might have been pride. Most people underestimate my mother because she operates quietly. You saw through that in one evening. Good. Did I pass? Lena asked, only half joking. The family test? You held your ground without being aggressive. You were honest without revealing vulnerabilities, and you made my mother curious instead of dismissive, Marco replied. Yes, you passed. Better than I expected, actually. Something warm unfurled in Lena's chest at the approval in his voice, which was ridiculous. She shouldn't care whether Marco DeLuca was pleased with her performance. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. But she did care, she realized. Despite everything, despite the calculated nature of their marriage, she wanted to succeed in this strange new role she'd been thrust into. The car pulled up to their building, and they rode the elevator to the penthouse in comfortable silence. Once inside, Marco loosened his tie with visible relief, the formal persona he'd worn all evening falling away to reveal the private man beneath. Drink? He offered, heading for the bar cart. Please, Lena said, kicking off the expensive heels that had been slowly destroying her feet all evening. Marco poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Lena before settling into a chair near the windows. She took the opposite chair, the city spread out before them like scattered jewels on black velvet. Thank you, Marco said after a moment. For tonight. I know it wasn't easy. You warned me it would be difficult, Lena replied, sipping the whiskey. It burned going down, warmth spreading through her chest. I survived. You did more than survive, Marco said, his dark eyes studying her in the dim light. You impressed my mother, which isn't easy. You stood up to my father without backing down. You navigated a room full of people who were looking for reasons to dismiss you, and you gave them nothing to work with. I had good practice being invisible, Lena said. Tonight I just had to be visible in the right way instead. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When I first saw you at that engagement party, you were serving champagne and trying not to be noticed. I remember thinking you looked like you were preparing to disappear entirely, like at any moment you might fade into the wallpaper and cease to exist. Lena's breath caught. She remembered that moment, the electric shock of his gaze finding her across the crowded ballroom, the feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. Why did you notice me? she asked quietly. There were 100 people at that party, all of them more important, more connected. Why look at the catering staff? Marco's expression shifted, something unguarded crossing his features. Because everyone else in that room was performing, playing roles, wearing masks, calculating angles. You were the only person there who wasn't trying to be seen, which made you the only genuine thing in the entire evening. The admission hung between them, more intimate than anything they'd shared since the wedding. Lena felt her pulse quicken, awareness prickling along her skin. I'm still not sure I'm what you need, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Neither am I, Marco replied with brutal honesty. But you're what I chose, and I don't make choices lightly. He stood, setting down his glass with careful precision. Get some rest. Tomorrow we can return to normal routines, whatever those become for us. He left before Lena could respond, disappearing down the hallway to his own bedroom, leaving her alone with her whiskey and her thoughts, and the growing understanding that this marriage might be more complicated than either of them had anticipated. The following weeks developed a rhythm that surprised Lena with its normalcy. She and Marco shared breakfast most mornings, discussing plans and schedules with the ease of longtime roommates. He left for the office, or mysterious meetings she didn't ask about, and she spent her days exploring her new life with careful deliberation. Elena helped her navigate the practical aspects of being Marco's wife, the household staff to manage, the social obligations to fulfill, the intricate dance of Manhattan society that had its own rules and hierarchies. Lena attended charity luncheons with Carmela, who continued to evaluate and educate her with sharp-eyed interest. She had lunch with Isabella twice, slowly building what might become actual friendship beneath the family obligation. She also enrolled in classes to complete her degree, something Marco had encouraged without hesitation. You should finish what you started, he'd said when she mentioned it. Education is one thing no one can take from you. The nights were the strangest part. She and Marco would share dinner, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes in conversation that ranged from trivial to surprisingly deep. Then they'd retreat to separate bedrooms, the physical distance between them a constant reminder that this marriage had boundaries neither of them was ready to cross. Lena told herself she was fine with that. This was what they'd agreed to, partnership without intimacy, mutual benefit without emotional entanglement. But sometimes, late at night, she'd lie awake and remember the weight of Marco's gaze, the careful way he'd fastened her grandmother's necklace, the unexpected gentleness in his voice when he'd thanked her after the family dinner. And she'd wonder if the boundaries they'd established were protection or prison, and whether she actually wanted them to remain intact. 3 weeks after the wedding, Marco came home earlier than usual, his expression troubled in a way that immediately put Lena on alert. What's wrong? She asked as he poured himself a drink with more force than necessary. My father is making moves, Marco said bluntly. Testing my authority, questioning my decisions, particularly regarding you. He's convinced I made a mistake, and he's trying to undermine the marriage. How? Lena's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. Spreading rumors that you're not suitable, that I married beneath the family's standards. Nothing overt enough to challenge directly, but enough to create doubt among our business associates and family allies. Lena set down the book she'd been reading, her mind racing. What do you need me to do? Marco looked at her, something shifting in his expression. I need you to be exactly what you've been. Competent, intelligent, unshakable. My father thinks he can make you uncomfortable enough that you'll leave or make mistakes that prove his point. Don't give him that satisfaction. I won't, Lena promised, surprising herself with the fierce certainty in her voice. I didn't survive Patricia Hart to be destroyed by your father. Marco's lips curved in a genuine smile, the first real one she'd seen from him. No, I don't suppose you did. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch, closer than he usually positioned himself. There's a business dinner next week. Important clients, several family members, including my father. It's a chance to demonstrate that we're a unified front, that our marriage is solid regardless of his disapproval. I'll be ready, Lena said. Marco studied her face for a long moment, his dark eyes searching for something. You've adapted remarkably well to this life. I expected more resistance, more difficulty. I'm good at adapting, Lena replied. It's how I survived this long. It's more than survival now, Marco said quietly. You're not just enduring this marriage, you're actually building something within it. The classes, the relationships with my mother and sister, the way you've carved out space for yourself without asking permission. That takes courage. The compliment warmed something in Lena's chest, spreading through her like sunlight. I learned from you, she admitted. You told me to hold my ground, so I am. Marco's hand moved, almost unconsciously, to brush a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was intimate, unexpected, and Lena's breath caught at the contact. He seemed to realize what he'd done and pulled back, the distance between them reasserting itself like a wall sliding into place. The dinner's Thursday, Tess, he said, his voice returning to business-like tones. Elena will help you prepare. Then he was gone, retreating to his office, leaving Lena alone with her racing heart and the ghost of his touch still warm against her skin. She sat in the quiet apartment for a long time, her fingers absently touching the spot where his hand had been, understanding settling over her like inevitability. The boundaries they'd established weren't holding. The marriage they'd designed to be purely practical was developing cracks, fissures where something more complex and dangerous was beginning to grow. And Lena wasn't entirely sure she wanted to stop it. The realization that her feelings were shifting kept Lena awake that night, staring at the ceiling while her mind spun through implications and dangers. She'd entered this marriage with clear boundaries, explicit understanding that emotional attachment wasn't part of the arrangement. Marco had been honest about what he needed, a partner, not a lover. A solution to a problem, not a romantic entanglement. But honesty didn't stop her pulse from quickening when he entered a room, or prevent the warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled, or erase the memory of his fingers brushing her face with unexpected gentleness. This was dangerous territory. Falling for Marco DeLuca meant giving him power to hurt her in ways Patricia never could, meant exposing vulnerabilities she'd spent years protecting, meant risking everything she'd carefully rebuilt in the past few weeks. And yet, as dawn painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and pink, Lena couldn't quite bring herself to regret the crack in her armor. For the first time since her father died, she felt alive instead of merely surviving. The feeling terrified her, but she was done running from fear. The week leading up to the business dinner passed in a blur of preparation. Elena drilled her on the guest list, who was important, who was dangerous, who needed careful handling. Carmela called twice with advice about appropriate topics and warnings about potential pitfalls. Even Isabella checked in, offering solidarity and slightly wicked commentary about various family members who'd be attending. Uncle Tony will drink too much and say inappropriate things, Isabella warned over lunch at a cafe in Soho. Cousin Michael will try to impress you with stories about his business acumen, all of which are exaggerated. And Father will be watching for any sign you're uncomfortable or out of your depth. Sounds delightful, Lena said dryly, picking at her salad. Isabella laughed, the sound genuine. You're handling this better than I expected, you know. Most people would be intimidated by the DeLuca circus. You just seem determined. I don't have the luxury of being intimidated, Lena replied. I made a choice, and now I'm living with it. Backing down isn't an option. Because of the arrangement with Marco? Isabella asked, her tone carefully neutral. Or because of something else? Lena met her eyes, seeing genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Both, maybe. I'm still figuring it out. Isabella nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think my brother chose well. You're stronger than you look, and you don't play games. That's rare in our world. Your mother said something similar, Lena admitted. Mother has excellent instincts about people, Isabella said. If she's decided you're acceptable, that carries weight. Father will come around eventually, especially if you keep proving him wrong about you. The conversation shifted to safer topics, but Lena carried Isabella's words with her like armor as Thursday approached. The DeLuca women had accepted her, even if tentatively. That was something. Thursday evening arrived with the weight of importance, and Lena dressed with meticulous care. The gown Elena had selected was midnight blue, elegant and understated, expensive without being flashy. Her hair was swept up in a style that looked effortless but had taken 40 minutes to perfect. The diamond necklace Marco's grandmother had worn rested against her collarbone, a visible symbol of her position. She studied her reflection one final time, seeing a woman who looked confident and composed, someone who belonged at a high-stakes business dinner with Manhattan's elite. The transformation from Invisible Girl to Marco DeLuca's wife felt complete in this moment, though she knew the internal changes were still evolving. Marco was waiting in the living room when she emerged, and the way his expression shifted when he saw her sent heat through her veins. His eyes traveled over her slowly, assessment becoming something warmer, more personal. "You look stunning," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Elena's excellent taste," Lena deflected, trying to ignore her racing pulse. "Elena picked the dress," Marco corrected, moving closer. "You're what makes it stunning." The compliment hung between them, weighted with meaning they'd both been avoiding. Lena held his gaze, seeing something in his dark eyes that matched the confusion and attraction churning in her own chest. Marco seemed to catch himself, stepping back with visible effort. "We should go. Arriving late sends the wrong message." The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't advertise, where reservations required connections, and the clientele included politicians, business magnates, and people whose wealth came from sources they didn't discuss in public. The private dining room Marco had reserved was elegant and discreet, with a table set for 16 and subtle security positioned at strategic points. Vincent and Carmela arrived first, Vincent's expression already set in disapproving lines as he greeted Marco with stiff formality and acknowledged Lena with barely concealed disdain. "This should be an interesting evening," Vincent said, the words carrying implications Lena didn't fully understand. "It will be productive," Marco replied evenly. "That's what matters." Carmela diffused the tension with practiced grace, drawing Lena aside while the men discussed business. "Vincent's in a mood tonight," she said quietly. "Don't let it rattle you. He's testing boundaries, seeing if he can make you uncomfortable enough to slip." "I won't give him the satisfaction," Lena promised. "Good girl," Carmela said with approval. "Remember, you're a DeLuca now. That comes with armor as much as obligation." The other guests arrived in clusters. Business associates Marco needed to impress, family members who'd come to observe and judge, a few carefully selected allies who supported Marco's leadership despite Vincent's attempts to undermine it. Lena smiled and made conversation, deploying the social skills she'd honed through years of navigating Patricia's parties, adapted now for a more dangerous audience. Dinner progressed through multiple courses, conversation flowing around business deals and family matters discussed in careful code. Lena contributed when appropriate, stayed quiet when she didn't have relevant knowledge, and watched the power dynamics play out around her with growing understanding. Vincent was deliberately trying to exclude her from conversations, directing questions and comments to everyone except Lena, making it clear he considered her irrelevant to serious discussion. Marco countered by consistently bringing her into the dialogue, asking her opinion, treating her as an equal partner rather than decorative addition. The tension between father and son was palpable, a silent war conducted through glances and carefully chosen words. Midway through the main course, one of the business associates, a man named Richard, whose legitimate real estate empire reportedly covered less lucrative activities, turned to Lena with practiced charm. "Mrs. DeLuca, I understand you're quite new to the family. How are you finding the transition?" The question seemed innocent but felt loaded with assessment. Everyone at the table was suddenly paying attention, waiting to see how she'd handle it. "It's been educational," Lena replied calmly. "I'm learning that the DeLuca family has high standards and clear expectations. I appreciate the direct approach. It's refreshing after years of dealing with people who hide their judgments behind false politeness." Several people smiled, and she caught the flash of approval in Carmela's eyes. Vincent's expression darkened slightly, recognizing the subtle dig at his behavior. "You're quite young," another associate observed. "This must all be rather overwhelming." "I'm 23, Lena said. "The same age Carmela was when she married into this family, I believe. And I've found that youth combined with determination can accomplish surprising things." Carmela's smile widened, and even Isabella, seated further down the table, looked impressed. Lena was drawing parallels between herself and the family matriarch, positioning herself as following in respected footsteps rather than being an unprecedented disruption. Vincent's jaw tightened. He'd been trying to make Lena look weak and unsuitable. Instead, she was holding her own and earning respect from people whose opinions mattered. "Determination is admirable," Vincent said, his tone sharp. But this family requires more than determination. It requires understanding of our business, our values, our way of conducting affairs. Things that can't be learned in a few weeks. No, Lena agreed, which is why I'm grateful to have time to learn. Marco has been an excellent teacher, and I'm learning from the best examples available. She let her gaze rest on Carmela when she said it, making clear who she considered the best example, deliberately excluding Vincent from the compliment. The table went very quiet. Lena had just challenged Vincent's authority in front of business associates and family, done it with enough subtlety that he couldn't call her out directly without looking petty. Marco's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. Warning or support, she wasn't sure, but the contact sent electricity up her arm. Vincent's eyes had gone cold, dangerous. You're quite bold for someone so new to this world. I learned boldness from surviving circumstances that would have broken most people, Lena replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. I don't mean disrespect, but I won't pretend to be something I'm not. Marco married me knowing exactly who I am. I assumed the family would appreciate honesty over performance. Honesty, Vincent repeated, the word heavy with skepticism. An interesting choice of value in our line of work. Vincent, Carmela cut in, her voice carrying quiet authority. I think we've established that Lena is capable of holding her own in conversation. Perhaps we should return to the business matters we gathered to discuss. It was a clear order disguised as suggestion, and Vincent had no choice but to comply. The conversation shifted back to safer territory. Business deals, market conditions, carefully coded discussion of activities Lena suspected had nothing to do with legitimate commerce. She'd won that particular skirmish, but she could feel Vincent's anger simmering across the table, could see the calculation in his eyes as he reassessed his opinion of her from dismissible annoyance to actual threat. The rest of dinner passed without further confrontation, though the tension remained palpable. When the evening finally ended and goodbyes were exchanged, Lena felt exhausted from maintaining her composure through hours of subtle combat. In the car heading home, Marco was quiet for several blocks before speaking. That was either very brave or very foolish, he said finally. I haven't decided which. Did I overstep? Lena asked, anxiety threading through her voice. You challenged my father in front of people whose respect he values, Marco replied. You drew comparisons between yourself and my mother that elevated your position while diminishing his authority. You basically declared yourself a worthy opponent rather than an easy target. I'm sorry, Lena started, but Marco cut her off. Don't apologize, he said, and she caught the edge of satisfaction in his voice. You handled yourself perfectly. My father needed to understand that underestimating you is a mistake. You delivered that message far more effectively than I could have. Relief flooded through her. I was terrified I'd made things worse. You made things different, Marco corrected. Vincent can't dismiss you as weak or stupid anymore. That doesn't mean he'll accept you, but it means he has to take you seriously. That's significant. They rode in silence for a moment, the city lights streaming past. Marco's hand was still holding hers from when he'd reached for her at dinner, and neither of them had let go. You compared yourself to my mother, Marco said quietly. That was strategic. It was true, Lena replied. She was young when she married into the family. She had to prove herself, and she did it by being smarter and stronger than anyone expected. I'm following the same path. Marco turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense in the dim light. Is that all this is to you, following a strategic path? The question felt weighted with meaning beyond the words. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs as she considered her answer. It started that way, she admitted, but it's becoming something else. I'm not sure what yet. Marco's thumb brushed against her palm, the gesture unconscious and intimate. I'm not sure either, he said, his voice rough. This was supposed to be simple, a practical arrangement that benefited us both. Nothing involving people is ever simple, Lena said softly. No, Marco agreed. It's not. They arrived at this building, rode the elevator to the penthouse in silence that hummed with unspoken tension. Inside the apartment, Marco finally released her hand, and Lena felt the absence of his touch like cold water. Thank you, Marco said, turning to face her. For tonight, for handling my father with grace, for being stronger than either of us anticipated when we made this deal. It's not just your fight, Lena replied. I'm part of this family now, whether your father likes it or not. When he challenges you, he challenges us both. Something shifted in Marco's expression, heat and recognition, and something dangerous. He moved closer, and Lena's breath caught as he reached up to cup her face with both hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. This is a bad idea, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Probably, Lena agreed, her pulse racing. We had boundaries, rules. This was supposed to stay professional. I know. Marco's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Lena felt the touch everywhere, heat spreading through her body like wildfire. If we cross this line, everything changes. We can't go back to simple. I don't want simple, Lena heard herself say, the truth escaping before she could reconsider. Marco's control shattered. He kissed her with the intensity of weeks of restraint breaking all at once, his mouth claiming hers with hunger that made her knees weak. Lena kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer as every boundary they'd carefully constructed dissolved like smoke. They stumbled toward his bedroom, shedding expensive clothes between heated kisses, hands exploring skin finally allowed to touch. When Marco laid her on his bed and looked down at her with dark eyes full of want and something deeper, more complex, Lena felt the last of her defenses crumble. This wasn't the practical arrangement they'd agreed to. This was dangerous and real and completely outside the safety of their contract. And as Marco's hands and mouth learned her body with devastating thoroughness, as Lena discovered the man beneath the control and calculation, she understood that she'd been lying to herself from the moment she got in that car 3 weeks ago. This had never been simple. And she'd been falling for Marco DeLuca since the night he looked at her across a crowded ballroom and actually saw her. Later, lying in Marco's bed with his arm heavy across her waist and his breathing deep with sleep, Lena stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had just changed between them. The physical intimacy was one thing, explosive and incredible and better than she'd imagined, but it was what came after that left her reeling. Marco had been gentle afterward, careful in a way that suggested vulnerability beneath his usual control. They'd talked in the darkness, real conversation stripped of performance and strategy, sharing pieces of themselves they'd both kept hidden. He told her about the weight of family expectations, the constant pressure to be perfect, the isolation that came from never being able to trust anyone's motives. She told him about the years of being invisible, surviving on determination and stubbornness, the quiet rage that had kept her going through Patricia's cruelty. And somewhere in those whispered confessions, the marriage of convenience had transformed into something neither of them had planned for. Something that felt terrifyingly like the beginning of actual partnership, maybe even love. Lena knew she should be afraid, should be protecting herself against the inevitable hurt that came from caring about someone who'd explicitly said this wasn't a love match. But watching Marco sleep beside her, his features softer in relaxation, she couldn't bring herself to regret letting him in. Whatever consequences came from tonight, they'd face them together. That was worth the risk. Morning arrived too soon, sunlight streaming through windows Marco had forgotten to cover. Lena woke to find him already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Morning," she said, suddenly uncertain about the protocol for the morning after crossing lines they'd sworn to maintain. "Morning," Marco replied, his voice rough with sleep. "Any regrets?" "Should I have them?" Lena asked instead of answering. Marco was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes searching her face. "I don't know. This wasn't part of the plan. It complicates everything." "Life is complicated," Lena said, echoing their earlier conversation. "We can handle complicated." "Can we?" Marco's hand moved to trace her jawline, the gesture tender. "I'm not good at this, Lena. Relationships, emotional vulnerability, any of it. I know how to strategize and negotiate and manage business. I don't know how to be someone's partner in the way that matters." "Neither do I," Lena admitted. "I spent years being invisible, keeping people at arm's length, surviving instead of living. But maybe we can figure it out together." Marco's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his usual control. "I didn't expect you," he said quietly. "When I made that deal, I thought I was getting a solution to a problem. I didn't expect to actually care about you. The confession made Lena's chest tight. I didn't expect to care either, but here we are. Here we are, Marco agreed. He leaned down to kiss her, slow and deep, entirely different from the desperate passion of last night. This was deliberate, a choice made in daylight with full awareness of consequences. When they finally emerged from the bedroom hours later, Lena felt fundamentally changed. The woman who'd married Marco DeLuca 3 weeks ago had been protecting herself, calculating survival, afraid to hope for more than escape. The woman walking into the kitchen now wanted more, wanted partnership and trust and the possibility of building something real with a man who'd proven himself worth the risk. Over coffee and breakfast that felt domestic and surreal, they talked about what happened next. My father won't let last night go unchallenged, Marco said. You embarrassed him in front of people whose opinions matter. He'll retaliate somehow. Let him try, Lena replied, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. I'm done being afraid of powerful men who think they can control me. Marco's lips curved in genuine amusement. You realize you just declared war on Vincent DeLuca. I declared that I'm not backing down, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Not to my father, Marco said, but his tone held approval rather than warning. You're going to keep surprising me, aren't you? Probably, Lena admitted. Is that a problem? No, Marco said, his dark eyes warm. It's one of the things I'm starting to love about you. The word hung between them. Love. Not yet fully claimed, but acknowledged as possibility. Neither of them said it directly, but it was there, growing in the space between strategic arrangement and genuine partnership. The next few weeks unfolded with new complexity. Publicly, Marco and Lena presented the same united front they'd established, but privately, their relationship deepened in ways that both thrilled and terrified them. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences, discovered compatibility in unexpected places, argued about everything from politics to breakfast choices, and found that conflict didn't have to be destructive. Lena continued her classes, finding joy in learning for its own sake rather than as escape. She grew closer to Carmela and Isabella, building genuine relationships rather than strategic alliances. She even began to understand the family business in ways Marco carefully revealed, trusting her with information he shared with few others. And through it all, she and Marco navigated the transformation of their marriage from transaction to genuine partnership, stumbling sometimes, but always choosing to move forward together. Vincent's retaliation, when it came, was subtle and vicious. Rumors began circulating about Lena's past, carefully edited versions of truth mixed with outright lies. She was a gold digger who'd trapped Marco. She'd been involved in criminal activity before the marriage. She was unstable, unsuitable, a liability the family couldn't afford. Marco moved to shut down the rumors immediately, but the damage was harder to contain than either of them anticipated. Business associates started asking careful questions. Family members who'd accepted Lena began to show doubt. Even Carmela called to warn that Vincent's campaign was gaining traction. We need to address this directly, Marco said one evening, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. My father is trying to force us apart by making your position untenable. We can't let him win. What do you suggest? Lena asked, though she already suspected the answer. We make a public stand, Marco replied. There's a charity gala next month, the kind of event where everyone important will be present. We attend together, we're visibly united, and we make it clear that anyone who challenges you challenges me directly. Your father will be there, Lena said. Yes, Marco confirmed, which is exactly why we need to do this. He's testing whether I'll defend you when the pressure increases. I need to prove that I will, unequivocally. Lena understood what he was really saying. This was about more than defending her reputation. This was Marco choosing her over his father's approval, choosing their partnership over family politics, making a public declaration that their marriage meant something beyond strategic convenience. Okay, she said, we'll go to the gala. We'll face him together. Marco pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with fierce protectiveness. You understand what this means? If we do this, there's no going back. My father will see it as choosing sides, and he won't forgive easily. I understand, Lena said, leaning into his embrace. But I'm done letting powerful men dictate my life. Patricia tried to destroy me and failed. Your father is trying now, and he'll fail too, because I have something now I didn't have before." "What's that?" Marco asked, his voice rough. "You," Lena replied simply, "and that makes all the difference." Marco kissed her then, deep and claiming, and in that moment Lena understood that their marriage had become exactly what she'd never dared to hope for. A genuine partnership built on trust, respect, and something that felt increasingly like love. The gala was still weeks away, but the choice had been made. They would face Vincent together, defend what they'd built, and prove that the invisible girl and the feared Mafia leader had created something stronger than either of them alone. And whatever came next, they would handle it the same way they'd handled everything since that night Lena got into Marco's car. Together, unflinching, and absolutely refusing to back down. The weeks before the gala passed in a strange combination of normalcy and mounting tension. Lena threw herself into her coursework, finding solace in literature and business theory, while Vincent's rumors continued to spread through Manhattan's elite circles like poison in water. Marco became increasingly protective, his control slipping toward genuine concern that showed in the way he'd pull her close at night, hold her tighter than necessary, as if proximity alone could shield her from his father's attacks. "He's escalating," Elena warned one afternoon, her usually composed expression troubled. "Vincent's not just spreading rumors anymore. He's making phone calls, applying pressure to Marco's business associates, suggesting that the marriage is affecting Marco's judgment and therefore his reliability as a partner." Lena set down her coffee, the familiar anxiety tightening her chest. "What does that mean practically?" "It means deals are being questioned, alliances tested," Elena replied bluntly. "Vincent is trying to isolate Marco professionally, force him to choose between you and his business empire. It's a dangerous game, but Vincent's convinced Marco will eventually see you as more liability than asset." "He's wrong," Lena said with more confidence than she felt. "I know," Elena said, her expression softening slightly. "Marco's made his choice clear, but you should understand the stakes. If Vincent succeeds in undermining enough business relationships, Marco could lose significant power within the family structure. That has consequences beyond just reputation." The unspoken warning was clear. People in Marco's world who lost power often lost much more. Safety, security, sometimes their lives. Vincent wasn't just attacking their marriage, he was threatening everything Marco had built. That evening, Lena found Marco in his office, surrounded by files and looking more exhausted than she'd seen him since they married. His tie was loosened, his usually perfect composure frayed around the edges, and something protective and fierce rose in her chest at the sight. "Bad day?" she asked from the doorway. Marco looked up, his expression easing slightly when he saw her. "3 deals fell through today. Associates who've worked with me for years suddenly developing concerns about my stability and judgment. All of them received calls from my father first." Lena crossed to his desk, perching on the edge. "Elena told me he's escalating." "He's trying to force my hand," Marco said, leaning back in his chair with visible frustration. "Make the cost of keeping you so high that I'll have to reconsider. He thinks everyone has a price, a breaking point where principle becomes negotiable." "And do you?" Lena asked quietly. "Have a breaking point?" Marco's dark eyes found hers, holding steady. "Not when it comes to you. My father's going to learn that the hard way." The certainty in his voice made something warm and dangerous bloom in Lena's chest. She'd spent so long believing she was disposable that anyone who claimed to care would eventually choose something else, someone else, when the cost got too high. Marco was proving her wrong with every decision, every choice to stand beside her despite mounting consequences. "What if we gave him what he wants?" Lena said suddenly, an idea forming. Marco's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" "He's trying to make me look like a liability, like I'm damaging your business and reputation," Lena explained, her mind racing. "What if we flip that narrative? What if instead of defending against his attacks, we demonstrate my value so publicly that his claims become obviously false?" "How?" Marco asked, interest replacing exhaustion. "The Heart Foundation," Lena said, pieces clicking together. "Patricia shut it down after the embezzlement scandal, right? All those programs my father built, helping kids from difficult backgrounds get education and opportunities, all gone because of her greed." "Yes," Marco confirmed slowly. The foundation was dissolved, assets absorbed. What are you thinking? We rebuild it, Lena said, excitement building. But better. We create something that actually helps people, that demonstrates commitment to community and family values. I run it, which shows I'm capable and committed. You fund it, which shows you're investing in legitimate, positive ventures. Together, we turn one of Patricia's weapons against me into proof that we're building something meaningful. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through angles and implications. That's brilliant, he said finally. It addresses multiple problems at once. Shows you're not a gold digger, but someone committed to genuine purpose. Demonstrates our marriage is producing positive outcomes. And it reclaims your father's legacy from Patricia's corruption. Plus, it actually helps people, Lena added, which matters more than the optics. Marco stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the kind of fierce pride that made her feel invincible. You're extraordinary, he said against her mouth. My father thinks you're weak because you came from nothing. He has no idea what surviving nothing actually teaches you. When should we announce it? Lena asked, already mentally planning. At the gala, Marco replied immediately. Maximum visibility, all the right people present. We'll make it a major announcement, tie it to both our names, and watch my father try to spin charitable work as somehow negative. The plan took shape over the following days with remarkable speed. Marco's attorneys drew up paperwork establishing the foundation. Elena coordinated with event planners to arrange the announcement at the gala. Carmela, when informed, offered unexpected support and advice about positioning the foundation within existing charitable networks. This is smart, Carmela said during one planning session at her home. Vincent's attacking you on grounds of suitability and value. You're responding by demonstrating both in ways he can't credibly dispute. He'll hate it. That's part of the appeal, Lena admitted. Carmela smiled, sharp and approving. You're learning. The best defense in this family is often a strong offense that makes your opponent look petty for attacking you at all. Isabella was equally supportive, offering to serve on the foundation's board and using her social connections to spread positive buzz before the official announcement. Even some of Marco's business associates who'd been wavering started showing renewed confidence as word of the foundation leaked strategically through the right channels. Vincent's response came through family intermediaries. Cold silence from the patriarch himself, but increased pressure on Marco through various uncles and cousins who questioned whether dedicating resources to charity was wise, given current business challenges. He's furious, Marco reported after a particularly tense family meeting. The foundation undermines his narrative completely. He can't attack charitable work without looking cruel, but he also can't accept that you're demonstrating exactly the kind of family values he claims you lack. Good, Lena said with satisfaction. Let him be furious. The night of the gala arrived with the weight of culmination, everything they'd built over the past 2 months coming to a head in one crucial evening. Lena dressed with meticulous care in a gown of deep emerald green that Elena insisted made her look regal and untouchable. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, the diamond necklace from Marco's grandmother glittering at her throat, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the confident woman staring back. Marco appeared in the doorway of her room, stunning in a tuxedo that probably cost more than her entire previous wardrobe, and the way his eyes darkened when he saw her sent heat pooling low in her belly. You're devastating, he said, crossing to her and pulling her close, despite the risk to her carefully applied makeup. Every person at that gala is going to understand exactly why I married you. Because I look good in expensive dresses? Lena teased, though her heart was racing. Because you're brilliant, strong, and utterly impossible to ignore, Marco corrected, kissing her thoroughly. My father wanted me to marry someone decorative and manageable. He's about to learn the difference between what he wanted and what I actually need. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Temple of Dendur providing a dramatic backdrop for Manhattan's elite, gathered in formal wear and glittering jewelry. Lena felt Marco's hand steady at the small of her back as they entered, his presence a constant reassurance as hundreds of eyes turned to assess them. Vincent and Carmela were already present, holding court near the Egyptian artifacts. Vincent's expression when he saw Lena and Marco enter together was carefully controlled, but Lena caught the flash of anger in his eyes before he masked it. Showtime, Marco murmured, guiding her toward his parents. Vincent, Carmela, Marco said with perfect formality. You both look well. Marco, Vincent replied, his tone cool. Lena, how unexpected to see you still together given recent difficulties. What difficulties? Lena asked pleasantly, refusing to let him rattle her. Our marriage is stronger than ever. In fact, we have exciting news to share tonight. Vincent's eyes narrowed. News? You'll hear it with everyone else, Marco said smoothly. But I think you'll find it addresses many of the concerns that have been raised about our partnership's value. Before Vincent could respond, other guests approached, requiring social niceties and preventing further confrontation. For the next hour, Lena and Marco worked the room together, a unified team that moved through conversations with practiced ease. She noticed people watching them, assessing the dynamic, clearly trying to reconcile Vincent's rumors with the reality of their obvious partnership. Isabella appeared at one point, pulling Lena aside briefly. You're doing brilliantly, she whispered. Half the room is already reconsidering whatever father told them. The other half is just confused because you're clearly not the disaster he painted you as. Wait until the announcement, Lena replied with a confidence that surprised her. When dinner concluded and the program began, Marco took the stage with the commanding presence he brought to everything. The room quieted immediately, all attention focused on him as he began to speak. Thank you all for being here tonight, Marco said, his voice carrying easily through the space. This event supports causes that matter to all of us: education, community development, opportunity for those who need it most. Tonight, my wife and I are honored to announce a new initiative that embodies these values. He gestured for Lena to join him, and she moved to his side with her head high, aware of every eye in the room tracking her movement. Many of you knew Lena's father, Thomas Hart, Marco continued. He established the Hart Foundation for Youth Services 20 years ago, dedicated to providing educational opportunities and support for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. That foundation was unfortunately dissolved following financial irregularities, but its mission was too important to let die. Lena took a breath and picked up the narrative, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My father believed that every child deserved a chance to build a better life, regardless of their circumstances. He built programs that changed hundreds of lives before his death. Tonight, Marco and I are proud to announce the resurrection of that mission through the Hart DeLuca Foundation. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Lena continued, This foundation will provide scholarships, after-school programs, mentorship opportunities, and support services for young people in underserved communities. It will honor my father's legacy while building something new and sustainable for the future. We're committing significant initial funding, Marco added, and we invite others who share this vision to join us. This is about building community, creating opportunity, and proving that business success and social responsibility aren't mutually exclusive. The applause was genuine and sustained, people rising from their seats in appreciation. Lena scanned the crowd and found Carmela smiling with obvious approval, Isabella practically beaming, and Vincent sitting rigid with barely controlled fury. After the formal announcement concluded and people crowded around to congratulate them and offer support, Lena finally had a moment to breathe. She stepped out onto a terrace overlooking the museum's sculpture garden, the cool night air a relief after the crowded ballroom. She wasn't alone long before Vincent joined her, his presence making the temperature drop several degrees. Clever, he said without preamble. Very clever. Using charity to rehabilitate your image and undermine my concerns about your suitability. This isn't about image, Lena replied, turning to face him directly. It's about doing something meaningful with the resources and position I now have access to. Don't play naive with me, Vincent snapped, his control slipping. You're a gold digger who trapped my son with a sob story and convenient timing. This foundation is just another manipulation. You're wrong about me, Lena said calmly, refusing to let his anger affect her composure. I married Marco to escape an impossible situation. That part is true. But what we've built since then is real. I'm not trying to take anything from him or from this family. I'm trying to contribute something positive. You're a liability, Vincent insisted. You come from nothing. You have no useful connections, no understanding of our business. Marco married you on impulse, and he'll regret it eventually. No, Lena said, steel entering her voice. He won't, because unlike the strategic alliance you wanted him to make with Vivian Hart, our marriage is built on genuine partnership. We trust each other. We support each other. We're choosing this every single day, not because we have to, but because we want to. Vincent's expression darkened. You think love protects you? In this world, in this family, love is a weakness that gets exploited. Maybe in your experience, Lena replied, but Marco and I are building something different. We're proving that strength and partnership can coexist, that caring about someone doesn't mean sacrificing power or principle. Idealistic nonsense, Vincent said dismissively. Wait until the real challenges come. Wait until Marco has to choose between you and business interests that matter. We'll see how strong your partnership really is. We've already faced real challenges, Lena countered, including your attempts to destroy our marriage. And we're still standing, stronger than before. That should tell you something. Before Vincent could respond, Marco appeared in the terrace doorway, his expression hardening when he saw his father alone with Lena. Is there a problem? Marco asked, his tone carrying clear warning. Just having a conversation, Vincent replied smoothly, his anger masked again beneath social polish. Your wife is quite passionate about this foundation project. She is, Marco agreed, moving to stand beside Lena, his hand finding hers. It's one of many things I admire about her. Lena doesn't do anything halfway. When she commits completely. Vincent's jaw tightened as he read the subtext. Marco was talking about their marriage as much as the foundation. I hope you're right about her, he said finally, for your sake. I am right, Marco replied with absolute certainty. And I'd appreciate if the rumors and business interference stopped. You've made your disapproval clear. Continuing to undermine me professionally just proves you care more about control than about what's actually good for this family. The two men stared at each other, generations of complicated history and power struggles playing out in the silence. Finally, Vincent nodded once, sharp and reluctant. We'll speak more about this later, he said, then turned and walked back into the gala, leaving Marco and Lena alone on the terrace. Marco pulled her into his arms, tension draining from his shoulders. Are you okay? What did he say to you? The usual, Lena replied, leaning into his embrace. That I'm a gold digger, a liability, that you'll regret marrying me. Nothing I haven't heard before in various forms. He's wrong about all of it, Marco said fiercely. You're the best decision I've made in years. Even though I've complicated your life immeasurably? Lena asked. Especially because of that, Marco replied, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. Before you, everything was strategy and calculation and maintaining power. You've given me something to actually fight for beyond just survival and dominance. That's worth any complication. Lena kissed him, deep and claiming, not caring who might see them through the terrace windows. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I love you, she said, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. I know that wasn't part of the deal, and I know it makes everything more complicated, but it's true. I love you, Marco DeLuca. Marco's expression transformed, vulnerability and joy breaking through his usual control. I love you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I think I have since the night you got in my car and chose to fight instead of surrender. You're the bravest person I know, Lena, and I don't deserve you, but I'm keeping you anyway. They stood there together under the stars, the gala continuing inside without them, and Lena felt something settle in her chest that had been restless her entire life. She'd found home, not in a place but in a person, in the partnership they'd built from desperation and strategy into something real and lasting. The weeks following the gala brought unexpected peace. Vincent's attacks stopped, not because he'd accepted Lena, but because continuing them would have made him look petty after the foundation announcement's success. Business associates who'd been wavering returned to working with Marco, reassured by the visible strength of his marriage and the positive community response to the Hart DeLuca Foundation. The foundation itself became Lena's passion project, the thing that transformed her from Marco's wife into her own person with purpose and impact. She threw herself into the work with the same determination that had gotten her through years with Patricia, but now channeled toward building instead of just surviving. She hired staff carefully, developed programs that actually addressed community needs, built partnerships with schools and social services. Within 3 months, the foundation was serving 50 students with scholarships and mentorship. Within 6 months, that number doubled, and local media started covering their success stories. Marco watched her bloom with obvious pride, supporting her work while giving her space to make it her own. Their marriage deepened into genuine partnership, the kind of relationship where they challenged each other, supported each other, and chose each other every single day. Carmela became an unexpected ally and friend, offering wisdom from her own experience navigating the DeLuca family's complexities. Isabella became the sister Lena had never had, someone who understood the unique pressures of their world and could laugh about it over wine and honest conversation. Even Vincent eventually reached a grudging détente, still disapproving but no longer actively hostile. At a family dinner 6 months after the gala, he actually complimented the foundation's work, the words clearly costing him but spoken nonetheless. "You've accomplished something meaningful," Vincent said to Lena, his tone stiff but not unkind. "Your father would be proud." It was the closest thing to acceptance she'd likely ever get from him, and Lena took it as the victory it was. 1 year after their marriage, Marco surprised Lena with a weekend trip to a house in the Hamptons she'd never seen before. It was beautiful and private, overlooking the ocean, the kind of place that promised peace away from Manhattan's intensity. "What's this about?" Lena asked as they walked along the private beach, the winter sun weak but beautiful. "Our anniversary," Marco replied. "1 year since you got in my car and changed everything." "Has it been everything you expected?" Lena asked, half teasing but genuinely curious. Marco pulled her to a stop, turning to face her with the ocean wind whipping around them. "It's been nothing like I expected," he said honestly. "I thought I was getting a practical solution to a problem. I got a partner, a best friend, and the person I want to build a life with. You've made me better, Lena. Happier. More human." "You've made me brave," Lena replied, her eyes stinging with emotion. "You've given me room to become someone I never thought I could be, not just because of resources or protection, but because you actually see me and value what you see." "I love what I see," Marco corrected, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Which is why I want to do this properly this time." He dropped to one knee in the sand, and Lena's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a stunning ring. Different from the practical platinum band she wore now, this one was clearly chosen with care and love rather than efficient necessity. "Lena Hart DeLuca," Marco said, his voice carrying over the ocean wind. "You married me when you had no choice, when it was survival instead of desire. I'm asking you to marry me again, this time because you want to, because you're choosing me and this life we're building. Will you marry me? Again, properly, with love instead of desperation?" Tears streamed down Lena's face as she nodded, words temporarily impossible. When she finally found her voice, it was steady and sure. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you again. I'll marry you as many times as you ask, because you're the best choice I've ever made." Marco slid the ring onto her finger beside the original band, then stood and kissed her with the kind of joy that made the past year's struggles worth every moment. They stood there on the beach, wrapped in each other, and Lena understood that this was what healing looked like, what choosing yourself and being chosen in return actually felt like. They remarried 2 months later in a small ceremony that was nothing like the rushed City Hall wedding. This time, Carmela and Isabella were there, beaming. A few close friends they'd made in the past year. And even Vincent attended, his presence a tacit acknowledgement that this marriage had proven itself beyond his initial objections. Lena wore white this time, a dress she'd chosen herself, and when Marco saw her walking toward him, his expression held the kind of unguarded emotion that made her feel invincible. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about partnership and trust, and choosing each other through whatever challenges came. When the officiant pronounced them married, Marco kissed her like it was the first time and the 1,000th time simultaneously, and Lena felt the last piece of her old life. The invisible girl who'd believed she deserved nothing finally fall away completely. At the reception afterward, Carmela pulled Lena aside, her sharp eyes soft with something that might have been affection. "I misjudged you initially," Carmela admitted. "I thought Marco had made an impulsive choice he'd regret. Instead, I watched you both become exactly what the other needed. That's rare, Lena. Don't take it for granted." I won't, Lena promised. This marriage saved my life. I'm not going to waste that gift. It wasn't just the marriage, Carmela corrected gently. It was you. You saved yourself by being strong enough to take the opportunity when it appeared, and brave enough to build something real from it. Marco provided the door, but you're the one who walked through it and kept walking. The words settled into Lena's chest like blessing and truth combined. She had saved herself, with Marco's help, but ultimately through her own strength and determination. That knowledge felt like power and freedom combined. 2 years after their first wedding, the Heart DeLuca Foundation served over 300 students across 5 boroughs. Lena had completed her degree and was considering graduate school. Marco had consolidated his position within the family business, his marriage to Lena proving to be an asset rather than liability, as she'd brought unexpected perspectives and genuine community connections to his work. They'd bought a house in Brooklyn, something more personal than the Tribeca penthouse, a place that felt like home rather than investment. On weekends, they'd walk through Prospect Park or explore new restaurants, living like any young couple in love rather than a Mafia heir and the girl he'd married from necessity. But they weren't any couple. They were Marco and Lena DeLuca, partners who'd built something extraordinary from desperation and strategy, who'd chosen love when they could have settled for convenience, who proved that sometimes the best relationships began in the most unlikely circumstances. One evening, 3 years after that first fateful night, Lena stood at the windows of their Brooklyn home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Marco came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice warm against her ear. "How different my life is now," Lena replied honestly. 3 years ago, I was invisible, scared, trapped. Now I'm building programs that actually help people. I'm finishing my education, and I'm married to a man who sees me as an equal partner instead of a burden. "You were never a burden," Marco said. "You were an opportunity I was smart enough to take." "We were both smart enough to take the opportunity," Lena corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "This works because we both chose it, both committed to making it real instead of just convenient." Marco kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips with the comfortable intimacy of longtime partners who still felt the spark. "Best decision I ever made, choosing you." "Best decision I ever made, getting in your car," Lena agreed. They stood there as darkness fell over Brooklyn, the city lights beginning to sparkle like stars, and Lena thought about the girl she'd been, invisible, afraid, surviving on determination alone. That girl had been brave enough to take a desperate chance when it appeared, strong enough to build something real from strategic arrangement, wise enough to recognize love when it developed unexpectedly. She wasn't that invisible girl anymore. She was Lena DeLuca, partner to a powerful man, director of a foundation that changed lives, a woman who'd learned that being seen wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace. The night she'd been forced into marriage hadn't been the end of her life. It had been exactly what Marco had promised at that first meeting, the moment it truly began. Everything since then had been choice and commitment, building something extraordinary from the ashes of who they'd both been before they found each other. And as Marco pulled her toward the bedroom with a smile that promised love and partnership and all the complicated beauty of the life they'd built together, Lena understood the truth she'd spent years learning. Sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances, and sometimes salvation arrived in the form of a ruthless man in a dark suit who looked at an invisible girl and saw everything she could become. She'd become that and more, not because Marco had saved her, but because he'd given her the space and support to save herself. That was the real gift of their marriage, not protection from the world, but partnership in facing it. Together, they'd turned desperation into love, strategy into genuine connection, and a marriage of convenience into something that would last far beyond any contract or obligation. They'd chosen each other. Every day, in 1,000 small ways and several big ones, they continued choosing each other. And that choice, Lena had learned, made all the difference.